Hello, Black Eagles. Welcome back to the Black Eagles podcast. My name is Cam Bayazit. As always, we are here to look into our new signings. And the big signing this summer so far was Leandro Trossard from Arsenal for a fee of 18 million. He signs a 3 plus 1 year deal worth 6.5 million a year. And joining me live right now from the United States is Ralph Hanna. Ralph, sorry. You're originally from the UK, an Arsenal fan, also a big Paraguay fan, sports journalist. You report on Paraguay, and all that kind of stuff. The Paraguayan football. We played Paraguay at the World Cup, of course. That didn't go so well for Turkey. Thank you for joining us and making time for this. I really appreciate it. So let's get straight into it. Let's get into Leandro Trossard. He spent the last 3.5 seasons, I believe, at Arsenal, at your club, your favorite club. And he was not always a guaranteed starter. He was a little bit of a utility player at times. He is known as Mr. Clutch for some of the clutch goals he scored over the years. But we were talking a little bit off air already, and I mentioned to you that Leandro Trossard is a youth product from Racing Genk, the club that I wouldn't say support, but the club in Belgium that I have affinity toward, and I know the player a little bit. I was a little bit surprised that he made the move to Arsenal because he went to the Premier League relatively late. I think he was 24, 25 years old, went to Brighton, spent a couple of seasons there, and then went to Arsenal at 28. And you were telling me off air that it was maybe a little bit of an atypical move for Arsenal because of the age. What can you tell us about that move? And did he deliver or even over-deliver on what you expected from him initially?
Yeah, that's right. Well, firstly, Ken, thanks for having me on the podcast. It's good to be here. And always fun to speak about Arsenal. And even though we are sad that Trossard has left, which we'll get onto how he performed in his kind of legacy. But yeah, firstly, I think it was surprising because Arsenal were in a position when they've had that process of signing young players. Arteta was already building his squad. They were always trying to get out of the issues they had where they were essentially not even in Europe and trying to build eventually a Premier League winning team. And someone like Trossard, because of his age and because of his profile, it didn't seem to fit at the time. One thing about him, as people will see, he's small, right? He's not particularly athletic. I think he's 1m70 or 1m72.
Something like
and
that, yeah.
He's not one of those wingers that's super fast and tricky and plays on the outside, right? And takes players on like that, which Arsenal was picking up from people like maybe Martinelli. They had Nicola Pepe for a time. Of course, Saka from the youth team. So it was a slightly different profile. And I think that's why it surprised maybe people at the time. And also the age, because then you thought, okay, if he's already 28, there's not really a sell-on potential. So what's going to be his role at the club?
Yeah, for sure. And about that sell-on potential, I think Arsenal signed him for £25 million. And now they're selling him 3.5 years later with a year left on his contract for 18 million euros. So the sell-on potential isn't too bad. They didn't lose a lot of money on him. They got a Premier League title out of it, a bunch of goals, a bunch of assists. So I think they got some good mileage out of Leandro Trossard. But what you mentioned there is interesting because, at Racing Genk, I would say he was more of a creator. He's not super tricky. He's no Ricardo Quaresma or something like that. He's not somebody that's going to be showboating off to the public. But even in the video I'm playing here right now as we're speaking, you can see that he does have some trickiness to him. He has that ability to beat his man, but it isn't a massive major part of his game. I think what makes him special is probably his intelligence, his runs, his off the ball movement at times, his shots, his shooting. It's obviously, I think, his greatest quality. And that's also what we saw at Genk in his final season. I believe it was his final season when they lifted the Belgian Pro League championship. He scored, I believe, 22 goals that season, which is really a lot for a winger. And we saw that at Arsenal as well, right? I believe it was in his first season. I think he scored 17 Premier League goals. But in the last two seasons, I want to say, bit less productive. I think this season he only had about 6 goals, 6 assists in the Premier League. Very important goals and assists, but the numbers were greatly reduced. So what do you think made him stand out compared to the other wingers at Arsenal? And why do you think that Mikel Arteta, despite the fact that he is a little bit older than his competitors, perhaps, for example, Martinelli is somebody that I believe was his main competitor for the starting position. What do you think set him apart from a Martinelli, for example, and other competitors?
Yeah, I think one of the points you just mentioned there, the off the ball intelligence and the type of runs he would make was just a bit different than anybody else on the team could give. And then he has this very good ability of like you were saying, kind of Mr. Clutch, but he has this ability of always trying to progress the ball and take the ball forward. So you have players sometimes that if they're not going to beat the man on the outside, they're suddenly like, okay, let's go back, let's recycle, let's start again. Yeah. But he used to come on as a sub a lot because it was when Arsenal was pushing for the game and needed something. Because essentially Arsenal is a team that would usually have more possession and have to break down teams for most of their games in the Premier League, right? Except against the other big sides. And so often he'd come on late to try and be the person to make a difference, and he'd come in with the intention to, okay, let's just look to go forward, and he would make those right passes, he would take those shots, and I think he got the rewards. And it is really interesting that he scored so many goals in that first season and didn't make many assists or any. I think maybe he had one.
I think
and then he became
he was 17 goals and 2 or 3 assists, something like that. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah. And then he became a player where it's more balanced, so he was getting about as many assists as goals. And so you could see he was adding things to his game while at Arsenal and finding that role always of being a very effective player. So he might not always look like the most exciting, as we were talking about in terms of showboating, but he was always so functionable and finding like some kind of effectiveness with his final pass or getting into the box and finding a goal. So he's ended up with this legacy of being a player that, might not have crazy numbers, but when you pick out the moments, he was always there in the important moments for Arsenal.
Yeah, and it's funny to that you mentioned that, because in his first 6 months at Arsenal, obviously he came in January, he played 22 games, scored only the 1 goal and had 10 assists. And then he goes into the next season and he does basically the complete opposite. He has 46 appearances, 17 goals and only 2 assists, as you mentioned. So he went from 1 goal and 10 assists in his first 6 months to 17 goals and 2 assists in the next full season. And then his last 2 full seasons, this season he played 50 matches, 8 goals, 10 assists. The previous seasons, 56 games, 10 goals and 9 assists, so a lot more balance there, as you mentioned as well. What do you think changed there? Do you think that his role in the team changed under Arteta in the last 2 seasons, or is it just maybe, form, luck, something like that?
Yeah, it's a good question, because I think Arsenal in general are probably scoring around the same amount of goals. I mean, I know this year there was a lot of focus on the defensive side of Arsenal, but it's not like the XG dropped a huge amount, and in terms of goals scored as well, it's not like hugely dropped. So I think one of the things we saw was from Trossard being used much more as so Arsenal do this thing sometimes where, because of Saka on the other side, the left winger is often like used as bait almost, or they're hanging there out as bait because they know teams are going to double up on Saka, and so they leave the left winger and just say stay up there and wait for the switch of play, because all the players are kind of drawn towards the right hand side, because you have Odegaard, Saka, and it was Timber or White playing there as well. And so what that can mean is, if that's working, the overload for Arsenal, in fact, the left winger doesn't do much in the game, because you find the goals through Saka, through somebody else. And so they're almost, like I say, being used as bait. They're not actually participating as much, which I think we saw it in some games. But yeah, I think also it was a part of with Trossard, just his overall importance to the team was very clear. I mean, he starts in the Champions League final, for example. I mean, he was needed by Arsenal. I think more and more given more responsibility because they saw that he was a player that could produce in important moments when they needed. I mean, just of course this season everyone will remember his goal against West Ham because that ended up being so important for the league title. But he also got, if I'm not mistaken, he got the opening goal against Tottenham this season. I think he scored the winner. It must have been the season before. It wasn't a late winner, but it ended up proving to be the winner. So he has these like the big games and the important games. So I think when people remember him, or Arsenal fans remember him, it won't be for crazy numbers, but it will be for the guy that popped up in the moments when they needed him.
Yeah. You mentioned that he was often brought on as a sub, like in games where Arsenal needed a goal. One of the challenges that Beşiktaş often face in the Turkish league is that a lot of opponents play with a low block. That is something in the Premier League, obviously it happens too, but I would say in the Premier League a lot more teams try to play football. There's not that many clubs who just park the bus and then try to play catenaccio and hope they can bang in one on the counter. Happens a lot in Turkish football. It's been a big problem for Beşiktaş over the last couple of years. They have struggled for quality wingers for a couple of years now. In fact, they've been on in a dire need for a left winger for years. And this is finally, hopefully, them addressing that. But how efficient, or how effective, I should say, do you think Trossard can be at helping to unlock those low block teams?
Yeah, I think we saw a little bit of that maybe in the World Cup with Belgium, because it was World Cup, I think, more of that style, the mentioning of teams setting up in low blocks and having to break down.
Definitely. Talking about Paraguay. not just against Turkey, but yeah. They were fantastic at it. We really turned it into an art form. And obviously, look, you can argue whether you like that brand of football or not, but they did a fantastic job. I mean, the way they gave France a run for their money. It's not something anyone else did up until the moment that France played against Spain, obviously. But yeah, it was very impressive. So yeah, worth mentioning.
It has its right, but it's not pretty to watch, but it can have its benefits. So I mean, for Trossard, I think what will be useful for Besiktas, and I'm sure there are people to appreciate, is because he can make those different kind of runs. I mean, he can go on the outside if he has to and cross with the left foot, but mostly you'll see him drifting inside. But he can come deep as well and start to almost be like an extra 10, right? And try and build in the middle. So those kind of movements is often what helps make the space and create space, rather than your typical winger who's just like, let me run and beat the player. And if they beat the player, great. But if they don't, nothing kind of changes, right? And those players are very easy to double mark. So I think you might see some of that movement will be where it brings something a bit different that maybe the team was missing last season. And of course, there's the quality. I mean, from coming, he's not coming from the Premier League like on a low. He's coming from winning the Premier League. He's coming from a great World Cup as well. He was probably one of Belgium's most important players.
Arguably their best player, yeah. And I mean, also to your point about his somewhat different role for Belgium, he is, right now, Messi surpassed him, but up until Belgium went out, he was the player with the most amount of chances created in the entire World Cup. He created 17 chances. Mohamed Salah has 16 chances, and Messi right now has 25 chances. That's the top three of chance creation in this World Cup right now. So that says something as well, given the fact that Belgium went out in the quarterfinals and didn't play in the semis, obviously. Yeah. So to your point that he had a little bit of a different role for Belgium. And yes, I having watched obviously Belgium's games, I think he was alongside Maxime de Kuiper, probably Belgium's best performer in all the games. Honestly, he was very good. 2 goals, 3 assists. It's a fantastic performance for a player who, you know, I wrote about this 4 years ago when Belgium was going to the Qatar World Cup, that he was the player that should have played, but Roberto Martinez at the time insisted to stick with Eden Hazard, who was running on fumes at that point.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a shame for him because he never really got that recognition for Belgium up until this World Cup, I feel. I think this is the first time, and it's a shame it comes at 31 years old because, yeah, this is the first time I really think that Leandro Trossard had gotten that recognition as a really, really important player. Even going into this World Cup, everyone looked at it from the outside as, oh, it's Belgium, it's golden generation that's, most of them have quit or retired. It's Courtois, Lukaku, and Kevin De Bruyne. But really, those are not the players that stole the show at this World Cup. And Leandro Trossard is one of the players that did shine for Belgium.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, one of the maybe, just to move on to the negative side for a moment, but then maybe one of the downsides are coming at this age is the fact he's been an important player is the minutes, right? He has accumulated so many minutes, and the Premier League is just, I don't know if there's a stat, but I think the injury levels because of the intensity of that league. And we've already seen some players in the World Cup. Oh, well, I'm mostly looking at Arsenal, but like Saliba is going to be out for a long time. Declan Rice didn't finish the game with England. And so Saka hardly played for England because he wasn't fully fit. So that's the one issue maybe that he comes with so many minutes, Arsenal having got to the Champions League final, Belgium getting, that it might take time to really get into the kind of rhythm of a new league, because every league I think has a slightly different setup, and so it can take a moment to adapt to that. So that might be one thing to consider, and like you say with the age, obviously, as feel this as well, right, that our bodies are not recovering at the same level, so there's something to consider there.
Yeah, for sure. And that's something I also wanted to ask you about. Obviously, when I watched Trossard, especially when I watched him at the World Cup for Belgium, I don't get the impression this is a 31, 32-year-old player. I still feel like when I'm watching him, he's like 27, 28. He still looks like a guy in his physical prime. And that was one of the concerns, I think, for a lot of Beşiktaş fans, because we have in the past signed way too many 30-plus-year-old players. We finally rejuvenated the squad. We have a very good age average right now. And this, forking out this much money, which is a really big fee for Beşiktaş. It's the third highest fee they have ever paid for a player that's now in his 30s. That was something that worried a lot of people. But can you maybe put their minds at ease? Do you think that Trossard still has plenty of mileage left despite the long season, as you mentioned?
Yeah, I think one of the positives is that he isn't an explosive player in terms of pace, right? So that's one of the things. Those players that really rely on pace, athleticism, as years go on, they can become less effective. I remember an English example is Michael Owen, right? Michael Owen's beginning of his career is much better than the end of his career, but partly because of the type of player he was. Whereas to compare with another Englishman, Wayne Rooney was never in that kind of, he was more a physical guy and a bigger guy, and he just simply dropped back a bit and played a bit deeper instead of on the line, and he still was an incredible player, later on into his career. So with someone like Trossard, I think you don't have to worry so much that there's going to be this huge drop off all of a sudden. And like to your point, he almost seems to be having a late peak, because we're talking about when he joined Arsenal 28, and then I mean, this was not his best season for numbers, but it was his most important season in terms of what the team achieved. And so what really I think Besiktas is buying as well is a guy that has that experience of winning and has come from this very high level where he's going to set a very high standard, I'm sure, for the younger players around him. So I think sometimes what a team or what a squad needs is, if you're building that younger team, you do need some of those older heads with that experience that can lead by example and basically set those standards of what's needed to win a title or to win a league.
And then maybe my final question, this is a little bit of a naughty question because it's purely based on speculation, but right now Actually, as Leandro Trossard was signing his contract yesterday in the stadium, he was being presented in front of several thousands of Beşiktaş fans. The Beşiktaş fans were chanting not Leandro Trossard's name, but Mohamed Salah's name. Now, that was in reaction to some of the rumors that started the day before that Salah had been offered to Beşiktaş. But my question is, stylistically, how do you see a Leandro Trossard on the left and a Mohamed Salah on the right potentially work out? Do you think that can work out?
Yeah, I think it's not crazy to think of Saka on the right at Arsenal and Trossard on the left, or Salah on the right at Liverpool. And when you had Firmino, just as an example, playing there. So, I mean, it's not crazy. Those two can balance out. And what you can see is that you'll have Trossard always making the runs to make the space for somebody like Salah. I mean, I think that could actually function very well and be very exciting. You might have, of course, to your point, maybe the egos, right? Because you're going to have two very big egos all of a sudden thrown into this situation. Because one thing about Trossard is he was always very, confident in his own ability and in his value. Yeah. He was never happy being on the bench. Of course, as a professional, he did it. But this is a guy that's, I'm sure, in training every day is fighting and not fighting literally, but fighting for his place. To really, he's a huge competitive person, and that's partly why Arteta picks up these kind of players, because he was looking for that winning mentality when he had a group of players that hadn't won much together. So I think that was maybe one thing you'll see is that clash of two very big characters. But at the same time, sometimes those people lift each other up, right? And kind of start to take each other to other levels at internal competition. So it could be a match made in heaven for Besiktas fans.
Yeah, we'll see if we get to find out. Obviously, the Mo Salah stuff is just very much speculation at this point, but it does look like it's heating up significantly. So it could be an interesting combination. Going from what we are coming from on our wings to Leandro Trossard on the left and potentially a Mohamed Salah on the right would be pretty crazy. But I'm very curious to see how that will work out in Vincenzo Italiano's approach to the game. I'm very confident that Trossard can easily handle the demands that someone like Italiano puts on him, seeing as he did it with Arteta too, so that won't be an issue. But Salah at 34, I have a little bit of doubts. I don't know 100% for sure, but we'll have to wait and see if it happens. But Ralph, thank you very much for joining us and giving your insights on Leandro Trossard. One last question, maybe. Do you think, or how should I put it? What is Trossard's legacy at Arsenal in your opinion, and how do you see this pickup for Beşiktaş? Do you think it's a good one? Kevin Hatchard called the Alexander Nubel transfer a coup for Beşiktaş. Do you think this could classify as a coup?
Yeah, I mean, I think firstly on the legacy, he's left, he's left on a high, having won the league and scoring the important goals, made an assist in the Champions League final. I mean, he's up there with Arsenal fans, I think, as what we call like a cult hero, right? A fan favorite because of how he ended his time there for sure, but also because he always turned up, like you said, Mr. Clutch. He always found those moments to produce something important. And then as a coup, I really think it is. I mean, I can't speak to the whole history of Besiktas, but I don't know how many times a player has left the Premier League champions or a top 5 league as a champion and been an important part of that team. I mean, I think that really from the Besiktas side is a statement to the rest of the league, right? Of where they're trying to, purchase players. I think it is a really big coup, and yeah, I think it can work out very well for them the season beyond.
Yeah, I think you make a good point. I mean, obviously Turkey is known a little bit as a retirement home. Well, whether that's fair or unfair, there's been some really big signings over the years, but it's rare to see a player coming off of such a season where he was so important and instrumental to the success of his team to then move to the Turkish Super League. I on the top of my head, I can't really think of another example. Obviously, look, Galatasaray fans may say Victor Osimhen, but Victor Osimhen didn't arrive after winning the league. That was the season after. So yeah, it's a good shout. I can't really think of an example straight away. Maybe Daniel Guiza. I think he won the Euros with Spain and then went to Fenerbahce. So that one maybe, but yeah, so it's a great shout. Thank you, Ralph, for your time, and of course, all the best to Arsenal this coming season, and to Paraguay for the next Copa America.
Thank you, Ken.
All right, and thank you all for watching, of course. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and let us know in the comments what you think of the signing of Leandro Trossard.